deactivation, they had a hell of a time. And there's written documentation that as many times, every time they turned around, they go back down there, the pressure built so much. Well, all that area, that's the super volcano area of America.
Well, what'd they do during operation?
I'm sorry?
What'd they do during operation?
Well, that's a good question. I don't know. I can tell you what Matt Sikela told me when he first went out there during the winter. And it was pretty chilly. And he climbed up, not to Sturgis, but the first one, and not to New Underwood. Doggone it, I can't think of the name. But anyway, he got there, and he walked up to one of the launchers. They'd already removed the plug to the equipment terminals.
Nah.
And so anyway, he thought it looked odd. It was awful slick the way it went down. And then sure enough, it was open. So he went all the way in it, went clear through the launchers to the equipment terminal, and saw at the equipment terminal, here's the stack of carcasses that had slipped down the walls and fallen through the hole.
Damn.
And he made reference to that, but I remember, I still have the emails from all of these guys. But Matt went on to describe a story. He was at one of the sites. I don't recall which one it was. He got a portion of the technical order, the TO library, out of one of these sites. And he says, Gary, he remembered looking up, and he said it looked like all of this dangling stuff in the ceiling, and all of a sudden he realized it was snakes.
Damn.
Well, long story short, too, is that you have to understand the tie-in here. Bill Huey's instructor was Matt Sikela. Okay, so the friendships go way back. And so all of these guys are all, let's face it, all first-generation guys are all interconnected. I don't know how, but it's just true. They all are. Whether one was an instructor and one was this, I don't know. But it's all that way. And so, it was just, one of those fun stories. So when you try to hold me to just talking about the Beale sites.
Yeah, it's hard.
Bryce, it's tough because there's so much more that can all be brought in, and it all makes the picture that much fuller. Okay. In terms of first generation Titan I.
Well, we could talk about it. We could talk about it all day, and we could keep going on and on.
I've got, just from these guys, because I never forget this. I don't know why. It's Phil Moore taught me most. He says, Gary, how the hell do you remember all this stuff? I said, oh, no, I just remember it. It's like I felt like I was a sponge, and you're just soaking this, because it's what I loved.
Well,
somebody asked me when I give the tours, it's Site 4. I said, you have to understand, when you're playing these things as a kid, can you imagine, you're walking through this site and you got 50-cent flashlights and a Coleman lantern. There's no books. You couldn't go to the Roswell Public Library and get a paragraph about Atlas F.
That's right.
And hell, the Roswell area had 12 of them. Okay? It created the environment of, it was unbelievable. I can't even describe, it was this, I guess the closest I would call it, I'm not a murder mystery reader, but I can only fathom that it's something like that in terms of it's very addicting, trying to figure out who did it, who done it. That kind of a scenario in trying to figure this out for first generation. And then when you spend the summers, and then here you go to military school there, and then these were the only sites, the only F sites were the only ones my family didn't do anything with. They did everything with Atlas Ds, Es, and Titan Is. And then, of course, the Air Force tracking stations and in the Army, the Nike sites. But, so you still get the draw, but I didn't have anybody I could immediately pick up the phone and say, hey, Grandpa, what about this?
I understand.
What about that? I used to tell Fred Epler the story. See, the mounts that those 1 megawatt diesel generators sat on, that's truly a subfloor.
Yeah.
Below it is the true original floor to the Titan I powerhouses. Well, below that concrete floor, they installed giant springs
What were they called? Bolts or
to shock
something?
mount it. I'm sorry?
What were they called? Like bolts or,
I don't know on that. I just remember my grandfather was in charge of, he would do the powerhouses, and of course before, they formed it all out. They had these big timbers down there to suspend, to hold the forms in place while they poured the upper floor. That then, when the jacks were when they jacked it back up and removed the posts, the wooden posts, they could then lower that whole floor down on the springs, right, to shock mount it all.
Yeah.
It was the only way they could build it. Well, my grandfather would tell me the story that when he would go through and order certain pieces, certain ones of the jacks, they would all try to lower at the same time, so much. And of course, nobody was allowed down there. Obviously, if there was a failure, the guy would be killed. He would basically be squashed.
Yeah.
So a lot of this was done hydraulically. And my grandfather would tell me that when they were letting it down, it was so heavy when the jacks were coming down that the wooden posts that would use, you could hear as the floor was coming down, those big timbers were just cracking and breaking and popping as the whole floor was settling in on the springs. Well, all of that's still there. You see, so I was having this conversation, I remember years and years ago, with Fred Epler. And Fred didn't realize that. I said, Fred, it's down there. He says, Gary, I know how to get there. I said, well, sometime in a dry site, I'd love to go down there and see it. Because then it would absolutely make sense of what my grandfather would tell me as a child.
Absolutely.
And see, you've got Barry's site, plus you do have the Warden, or you do have Royal City, because see, it's, if I'm not mistaken, its powerhouse is dry. It's just the launchers and a portion of the utility.
Yeah, that's right.
Correct me if I'm wrong.
No, that's right. There's videos.
No, go ahead.
Well, there's videos they give, like the dry side, the LCC and the powerhouse, and then the launchers and the utility tunnels. That's right. I would love to. There's certain of them I would love to see from that standpoint. I would love to see, how all that was done. But, look, again, I'll go back to Fred. There was nobody better, in my opinion, than Fred Epler when it came to Titan I. He was truly the master of Titan I. And if you look at a lot of the what we call the 6 Lowry sites, their air intake and air exhaust are different than all the other squadrons. Completely different. And here's one that you really may not know, but again, it's hilarious how, I guess one word, it's a pretty technical, they call it synchronicity, okay? Mm-hmm. Well, I tend to believe there's something true about this. And why I say that, not that I'm a believer, but just there's something about it. It's if you look back to the headquarters, if you go on Siloworld and look for the operational photographs for the Titan ones at Lowry, I think it was the 451st Strategic Missile Wing, you will see the original building that operated as the command post, the operational building for the 2 missile squadrons there, which was on Lowry Air Force Base, which, when I was there with Fred took me by there. That building's still there. Is it?
Okay? Yeah, most of everything else is torn down, but by God, that building's there. Well, if you look very close at that building was the first original U.S. Air Force Academy.
Damn.
It was used until Colorado Springs was built. And so I always thought it was kind of neat because all of these things play back into the missiles.
Oh, yeah.
For some reason, it just works that way. Go ahead.
Yeah. I mean, I think I Googled, you told me one of those discussions we had, and I looked at the building, and it's still there.
Oh, yeah.
It's awesome.
I don't even know how to describe it. I mean, it's just, again, it's just something interesting about how all of these, the way they all